G'day, guys. We are all on YouTube. I was just saying a row that the minute I sound like I'm YouTubey, we are live. But g'day, guys. It is the coach here, and we are talking all things Skaven. I am excited to talk about Skaven. It has been a while, and I thought I'd try something a little bit different, guys. I try a little bit different. We haven't got Dan Brewer on for the first time forever, so I hope people don't crush the dislike button. But I thought I'd get a little bit of diversity on the show. I have Roe. Roe is from Measured Gaming. He is very, very good. One of the most highly sorted players out of the Measured Gaming crew. They're always talking really loudly about him. But he's a Skaven player. He's been playing Skaven for a while now. Recently had some good success at a recent, I keep saying recent, a local tournament. You played in a 50-player event. And I really liked your list. So I thought I'd pick it up and see where Skaven is at in the current meta. It's been probably over 12 months or just under 12 months since I spoke Skaven. So how are they good still? How are you adapting to the meta now that we've got Teclis and Seraphon and Zench and Gargans running around? What's your thinking? What's your rationale? But before that, welcome.
Thanks, Coach. So I've been playing Age of Sigmar since probably towards the end of AOS 1 when it first came out. I just randomly picked up the box and was like, this looks cool. Thought I'd paint some models. And it just so happened my neighbor came around and my son just ran up to him and said, oh, my dad paints these little models. He's gone, I'm not going to try, but with the thickest Geordie accent you can imagine, has gone, oh, really? So do I. So that's how me and Pete Atkinson got into AOS at the same time, really.
Geordie accent. He looks like he's from Geordie Shore. A bit dodgy, that Pete in his tracksuit. But you've been playing Skaven for... tracksuits. Oh, gosh.
Yeah. You wait till the Vic GT, you'll see everyone in tracksuits.
Amazing. I should get my tracksuit, get my bum bag. I'll go Leb style, like me, good Canterbury Bankstown player fans might just bad English. I'm going to move to Skaven. So we are talking Skaven. If you haven't seen this before, we're basically going to talk about the rules, the allegiances, how Roe as a experienced player looks at the rules, because when I pick up Skaven for the first time, it might not be clear on why or what or how I built the list. So before we get into the list discussions, I'm going to hear his take on the allegiance abilities, how he thinks about that in list building, things like the terrain piece, like the Gnawholes as well. How do you kind of bring the Gnawholes onto the table? Is it offensive, defensive? What are some of the things that you're thinking about? But and I can see your crew's already giving you grief. I don't know why Roe's on the show. He doesn't even play them. Shout out to the Overlord Joel there. So let's assume that you did play, or let's pretend that you play with Skaven. Why? Why would you play with Skaven? Because you guys keep eating my cheese. You keep, interrupting the Black Pyramid. You're interrupting my Cities of Sigmar. Why Skaven?
So I got into Skaven mainly because the abilities sounded cool, and it sounds like such a cool army from the outside, it sounds like an amazing army. It's like you can do so much damage, or you can blow yourself up, or sometimes it both happens at the same time. Like, there is never, I guess, from the outside looking in, and it's true from the inside as well, there is never a boring game with Skaven. Something crazy happens every time. So it's one of those armies where it's like, even like whether it's a hard game, whether it's a close game, whether you're absolutely getting smashed, something fun, funny, enjoyable is going to happen. So that was kind of why I got into it, and it really rings true. It's a really fun army to play.
I will say I used to play against a lot of Skaven in the olden Warhammer Fantasy days, and I tell you right now, you used to be a lot more random than you ever were. I think the Doom Wheel would just go all over the place. Like, you couldn't control it. It was the funnest, and it was the stupidest thing in the world. Hashtag make Doom Wheels great again. But I really like Skaven. I've got my Horde army, I've got my Gits army, but if I think about the range, I just love the range. They're just quirky, they're unique. I think a few of them need an update in their sculpts, but when you look at this rat swinging on a bell, when you look at these like manipulation Hulk type kind of rat men, and you've got, just giant rat swarms and things like Thanquil, it's just a quirky, fun army. And you do little things like make your general white, like a little rare Albanian rat. And it's just, I don't know, it's great.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of fun you can have, not just with the rules and the army, but also with the modeling. There's a whole lot of fun you can have, like, just like painting them in different ways and like modeling them differently or converting them. Like I've got a 40k tech priest as my Arch-Warlock because like Scry just fits so well with 40k.
Yeah, because they've got the technology side as well. So, and by the way, they are competitive. I think as the other part is, they are a hobby, a lot of fun, and they go well with contrast. You can, you can probably just do them brown and dry brush them and pick up that fur, and they're probably a quick army. Or you can do a lot of detail.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then you got the crazy kit bashes and conversions as well. But I think I actually did a video for the preparation for Hedonites and Daughters, and I'd ranked Skaven at like the C tier.
Yeah.
And I got a lot of grief from Skaven players. And it's not that I think that Skaven is a lower tier army. I just think they're a very hard army to master. And there's certain builds in the book. I don't think you can pick up the most of the book and run it really well competitively. I think there's a very nuance to it. And I think that's why you don't see many Skaven players at your tournament and they're not doing as well. Like there's a handful of people who do really well, but it's quite a challenging army, which is why, again, I wanted to chat to you to understand how you're thinking about your army and how you're adapting to the meta.
Yeah, great. It is a very, I describe Skaven as a toolbox army. It can do anything and everything. And what you got to do is kind of build towards your style of play because there's obviously not enough points in 2000 to build literally everything. So you got to kind of tweak it to your way of playing.
And if you're someone like my clubmate Thomas Holdsworth, who ran 200 giant rats at CanCon a few years ago and took down Archeon when Slayer of Kings was only Rend 1, he was the internal champion with his little slave pit guys. But look, I think for me, I would love to understand this army a whole lot more because when I look at Skaven, it has traits of Cities of Sigmar. It has traits of Gloomspite Gits, but it's an earlier book than both of those two. So the synergies or the sub-allegiances probably aren't as clear as, let's say, Cities. Like it's very easy to see Tempest Eye. But when I look at the allegiances, there's a whole bunch of things I'm going to get, and maybe it's probably not clear to people. So I might read out some of the rules, and I'd love your understanding of, are they important, how you think about them in your list tech, and then we'll kind of bring it over to actually talk about it in your list.
Sure.
So the first one you've got is lead from the back, and basically look at Sir. So if you don't know what look at Sir is, if you're within range of a unit, if you're like a little small hero, right? You're a little small hero, I think it's under 8 wounds, and you put it, near a foot troop, clan rats, for example, and you shoot at it, it would be -1 to hit without any artifacts or command traits. It's just, harder to hit. But you get that rule as well when you're in combat, as well as missile fire. So as long as it's a Skaven hero and it's not a monster. And there's a very interesting mechanic with a certain rat on a certain bell.
It's not just the rat on the bell. So this is where, Skaven has all these amazing rules, and this is one of my favorites because the two things that I will never probably leave out of a Skaven list for myself is the Screaming Bell and the Plague Furnace. And they are two giant 13 wound, monsters essentially with a 5+ after save. So they're already tanky.
But they don't have the monster keyword.
They don't have the monster keyword.
I just wanted to call that out because, you said they're a monster, but they're actually not a monster. So this big rat on a chariot gets look at Sir.
Gets look out, Sir, in shooting and combat. And worse than that is if you look at the the stat line, especially on the Plague Furnace, you put that thing into combat, on a 2+ it's doing, say somewhere around 7 mortal wounds. And that's just from one of its melee profiles, and it's got 4 melee profiles. It will do some damage in combat, and it's really hard to hit. So it's not just it's great to have it harder to hit in shooting because they are really centerpieces to the army and they're essential to the army, which you'll see in the lists I've got. They're up there. They're very important pieces to my armies, and they're just hard to remove. Yeah. So the lookouts in shooting and in melee, it just makes them an even worse target. But at the same time, until you take them down, it's hard to actually dismantle my army.
And, your Skaven heroes don't want to be in combat, other than your Vermin Lords. You don't want your Bombardiers or your Arch-Warlocks. Those guys, no, that's the last place they want to be, like I said, other than the Vermin Lords. So getting that -1 to hit in shooting and combat is a nice little ability, especially if you do find yourself in combat.
Absolutely. And in fact, it's going to lead very quickly into the very next ability that we're going to look at, because the next one is Scurry Away, which is the other ability that saves your heroes when they're in combat. And go ahead.
Yeah, cool. I only repeat it because some people join us on the podcast, and just in case I don't have the battle tome there. But Scurry Away in the combat phase, if you pick a friendly Skaventide hero, so Skaventide being all of your heroes, to fight with, you can say that it scurries away instead of making a pile-in move. If you do so, the hero makes a normal move, so it must retreat. So you're just going to move away from combat, which is outside of 3 inches from an enemy. So, why is this important?
So, again, I mean, at the start of this, I described Skaven as a toolbox army. There are cases where you'll want your guys in combat and actually, destroying everything. There are cases where, like, the only reason you got into combat is to run away onto an objective, which I've done so many times. And there are cases where your poor Screaming Bell or Plague Furnace is literally about to get smashed by something very hard hitting. I'm thinking along the lines of, like a Terrorgeist or some, Hearthguard or, something that really punches. And you just go, great, I'm activating and I'm running away. And then your opponent's sitting there going, but I was going to kill it. So it's a super powerful thing, and you can use it to reposition yourself. You can use it to, like I said, get onto an objective that you're otherwise never going to get into. So, like, I've had cases where I've charged like an Arch-Warlock. I think it was into a Magmadroth, and my opponent was like, "What are you doing?" And I've gone, "Oh, you'll see." And it's like, right, first activation, Arch-Warlock runs away, scored an objective, scored the points.
It's perfect when it's your turn as well, because you're going to get to activate first, so which one's you're going to, like, right, I'm running this into combat, I'm going to position it the best way possible, and then I'm going to retreat even further. So it means you're going to seize objectives, you're going to deny opponent points, you do a lot of things, and also just annoy them. I think Dan Brewer does that a lot to me. Like, he'll just like retreat, and I'm like, cool, I'm going to activate, and then he'll run away. So when I'm in combat, I've got to choose very carefully who I attack, because I know he's going to retreat as soon as possible. So it makes the opponent think a little bit differently, because there's not many other armies that have the same type of mechanics.
And there are, and we're going to get into it because there are pages and pages of this. There are so many mechanics.
And I think maybe that's another thing that, you look at this and it's very overwhelming, but once you kind of understand the rules, you're like, right, now I know how to make my decisions, because it's very much keyword dependent. And I think, again, it reminds me of Cities of Sigmar, where it's keyword bingo. Instead of having, Duarden, Human, Darkling Coven, you have Master Clan, Eshin, Verminus, you've got the, very similar kind of, so finding the keyword synergy is very much like bingo. But before we get to those clans, you've got 2 other rules. You've got the overwhelming mass. So you get +1 to hit when you have melee weapons of a unit with more than 20 models, or 20 or more. And in addition, when you have 30 or more, you also get +1 to wound. So units of 20, +1 to hit in combat, not shooting. And when you've got 30 or more, you're getting +1 to wound as well as +1 hit in melee.
Yeah. This is one of the surprises that a lot of my opponents experience in a Skaven list, because, like, for example, and Plague Monks are the best example of this. Everyone looks at the Plague Monk War Scroll and goes, they're not that good. And then, I take them in a block of 40 with this ability on its own, and suddenly they're, hitting on 3s instead of 4s, wounding on 3s instead of 4s. And then there are other buffs, which, again, they're down the track, and you'll see them in my list. I've had my Plague Monks hitting on 2s, wounding on 3s, re-rolling wounds. And when you've got that with, like 40 models doing 3 attacks each, the volume of damage is just insane.
By the way, I've got to call out that I've got to call this comment out. Patrick Nevin saying, "Where's Dan? He knows he's Skaven." So
yeah, thanks, Pat.
Good to see the measured boys are out there. So that, on first inspection, you go, oh, so what? +1 to hit, +1 to wound on clan rats. Like, whoop-de-doo. But I think people have forgotten how powerful plague monks are. Yes, their war scroll has changed. Yes, they're not as powerful as they are. But I think to write them off is a mistake.
Oh, very much so. And the thing is, this particular overwhelming mass ability actually does it to any kind of big blob unit you've got. So clan rats can actually become scary with this. Storm vermin are terrifying with this ability. They're already strong, and when they're hitting on 2s, winning on 2s, it's just it's horrible with the -1 rend.
You've also got your strength in numbers, so your Skaventide when you take battle shock. So you get +1. Normally, we all get +1 bravery in the battle shock phase when we have 10 or more models. So for every 10, so 20 gets you +2, 30 gets you +3, etc., etc. But with Skaventide, you get +2 instead of the +1. So if I've got 10, I'm getting +2 to my bravery, 20 +4, 30 +6. On top of any other benefits that a banner might bring you or some type of other leadership buff. But that to me has always been a very powerful one. I've always found that, again, Dan being my primary Skaven opponent, very rarely has to use his command points on battle shock because, his leadership is around the 8s and the 10s. And then you add, actually probably more than that, to be honest.
Yeah, totally. Plague Monk's default bravery is 6. So when you got to, and obviously when you start losing them, you're down to 30-something. They're on 11. So it's pretty big. They still do suffer from battle shock pretty badly. And with the current meta, the likes of, Lumineth and Fex shooting, all the bravery-based shenanigans that are going on at the moment, it's all based on your, War Scroll bravery. So, you don't get any of these bonuses until the battle shock phase. So you suffer quite a bit. Your block of 40 clan rats are essentially bravery 4 for the purposes of Lumineth and Fex kind of damage and debuffs. So it can really hurt. You still, Skaven traditionally doesn't have a lot of arbor saves, especially when you start going to clan rats, plague monks. So you might need to still spend a command point on those guys, depending on how much damage you suffer, or it might even encourage you to go towards the more multiple kind of small unit route as opposed to big blocks of 40 or 60. Just so, again, who cares if a unit of 20 rats die? They're screens, they're annoying the crap out of their opponent. But either way, getting +2 instead of +1 is a delight, especially when you start running these big blocks. Like Cinderfall gave me in the chat saying that he's got a local player who runs 120 Plague Monks still. So for 3 blocks of 40. So nasty. Oh, yeah. What I do find, though, is that bravery one for me doesn't play huge into my army because basically what I do is the Screaming Bell and the Plague Furnace have a 13-inch battle shock immunity bubble. So what I'm doing is I'm keeping everything within that bubble and then I'm throwing out damage. So I'll send out a unit of 40 Plague Monks away from that bubble to kill and die. And then the next turn I'll send my next unit out to kill and die and keep everything else within that bubble so that battle shock from damage doesn't actually bother me.
Yeah, when we talk about Plague Monks, you'll see why they're actually okay to die. You'll do some damage and then when they die, it's actually a good thing. Reminds me of my squigs when they run away. I'm like, lol. You can have some mortal wounds back. But yes, the Screaming Bell having that 13-inch battle shock again, even if it's just turn 1, again, having a couple of extra CP up your sleeve because you're not spending it on Inspiring Presence.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, the other big benefit by being Skaven, other than having a terrain piece and other than having, command traits and spells and artifacts, is the way of the great clans. Now, this might seem confusing to people when you look at this, because normally it would say, if I pick my daughters of Cain up, Battle Tome up, or my cities of Sigmar, it would say, choose one of the cities of Sigmar that your army comes from, Hallowheart, Tempest Eye, Greywater Fastness. But I don't see that here. With Skaven, it just basically gives me a whole bunch of keyword bingo. If I am Master Clan, when I use a command point by a Master Clan model on a 5+, I receive an extra command point. When I'm Molder, there's certain things that a Molder gets, Eshin, Verminous, and then on the next page, it also talks about Scryer and Clan Pestilence. Now, there's a lot of rules, and this is not bedtime with Coach here, so I'm not going to read every single rule interaction. But when you look at all of these things, is this an incentive for you to find a little bit of everything? You know, I need a little bit of Eshen, a little bit of Verminous, a little bit of Molder. Do you go all in on, let's say, I'm just going to go all in on Verminous? Or how do you look at these rules? Like, what does it all mean?
So I've actually played around with this, because when I first got the book, I literally did that. I was like, great, how do I get one of each hero in this so I can have every single rule applied to my army? And I guess the outcome of it is you only really benefit from, let's say, the Molder command trait or the allegiance ability when you have a whole lot of Molder models. So, for example, if you've got no fighting beasts, then the extra D3 wounds on the 1 or 2 that you've taken is like, well, who cares? Like, I've got a 14 wound model instead of a 12 wound model, and the rest of my army gets nothing. So you kind of don't, from my experience, you don't build to the allegiance abilities. What you find is that the allegiance abilities support the heroes and units that you've already chosen anyway. So, for example, I'm pretty much always take the Screaming Bell, which is Master Clan. So anytime I do use a command point, I try to use it from the Screaming Bell, just so that I can try and roll a 5 up to get one command trait back. So if I'm ever, forcing a 6-inch run, or like I said, I rarely, if ever, use the stop battle shock one, because they're always within my bubbles. But any of the other abilities, like if I want to reroll ones to hit or something, I'll try and do it from the bell. So it's almost like it's an added bonus. You don't necessarily pick the Master Clan for this allegiance ability. There are some exceptions for me, and that's Scryer and Pestilence. If you look at Verminous, it looks cool. Like every Claw Lord you bring gets an extra, artifact. Command trait.
Yeah, not an artifact, it's command trait.
No, they get an extra command trait. But in the end, if you're running a whole bunch of, 5 wound, 5 up save heroes, then you're probably not really winning. So in most of these cases, I would say they're almost, kind of extra little benefits, but the exceptions being Scryer and Pestilence, which are freaking amazing.
Yeah, I would agree. By the way, Lee Taylor in the chat mentioning here, a lot of people struggle with this because I see a lot of commonality here with Gloomspite Gits, because under the light of the bad moon, Trogs get this, Gits get this, Spiders get this, Squigs get this, and you can certainly build, a quote unquote soup army where I have a little bit of Squigs, a little bit of Trogs, a little bit of this, but then you do find that the synergies don't quite work as well, or you're stretching yourself out to take advantage of the points. And you're normally better off going, at least 70% towards one build. And you can still have, some Squigs that go with your Trogs. Very similar here. You still might go Master Clan and focus on Master Clan, but then bring in a little bit of Scryer, bring a little bit of Verminous in, but try to, again, stick to your allegiance and stick to your focuses. And before we move on to Scryer and to the other page, which was also Pestilence. I'm being harassed. You got to give people a wave. So Scuba wants a wave.
Hello.
Amazing. All right. So you've got a whole bunch of things. Out of these 4, they're kind of okay. I guess the key is going to be finding the different keywords and the different units you want to bring. Again, unless you are going Scryer and unless you're going Pestilence, because Pestilence is going to really reward you through your priests, and Scryer is going to take it. And this is probably where I see most people focusing, is getting those Warpstone Sparks from the Scryer list, because they're just so good. Yeah.
I guess, yeah. And I was just going to say too, with the whole battle tome, a lot of people, especially when I talk to opponents about these rules, they struggle with the idea that I get access to them all, which, like you said, most people go, you pick a house, you pick a host, you pick I've played Khorne, you pick a slaughter host and you get just that, whereas I get whatever I take. And it's kind of worth understanding that these are probably not mutually exclusive. That you get whatever, as long as you have a hero with the keyword, you get to take the allegiance abilities. So yeah, with Scryer, and it's one of the biggest benefits. You get warp stones, which you can use to do things that are super important to your army. Things like re-rolling a cast, which is huge. Like when you have an essential cast to get off, you use one warp stone spark, you get to re-roll that if you fail it. It's like it can be game changing, especially when you think about Scryer in terms of the only spell that really matters, which is more warp power.
Yeah.
So if anyone doesn't know, more warp power lets you reroll all hits and wounds for one Scryer unit. That does not mean just in one phase. It's until your next hero phase. So if you do take something shooting like Giselles and you want to fish for those 6s, just reroll them. If you're taking, Storm Fiends, you throw them into combat afterwards because you get to reroll all your hits and wounds all over again. And again, and this is where Acolytes suddenly seem quite broken. Because again, on paper, they're 4s to hit, 4s to wound, and everyone goes, well, you're not going to get many in with that with one attack each and an 8-inch range. But when you're re-rolling them all, suddenly that -2 Rend D3 damage becomes quite scary. And then there comes into the next the next use of the spark, which is adding 1 damage in shooting, and that's horrendous.
Let me just put this out here. I played a game with Dan Brewer once, and it was my Gitz versus his Skaven, and I had a Colossal Squig going at his face, and unfortunately it failed its charge. It was some really horrific. My Loon Boss or Mangler Squig has a 3d6 move. It moved 4 inches, so it stuffed up my whole plan. And in return, Dan did 60 damage to my Colossal Squig. Not 60 to hit, not 60 wound, 60 damage. Needless to say, that Colossal Squig was no longer there. But they absolutely can pack a punch. Those acolytes. They're brutal. And then Giselles with their long range shooting. So Scryer really supports the shooting part of Skaven and the mortal wound output, and especially right now with some of these things, some of these armies that are really reliant on key pieces. Literally only last night I was talking to Fire Slayers and I was saying, doing mortal wounds from range is the key to take down things like Fire Slayers, taking down those heroes, taking down Lord Croak, taking down Teclis from afar. And it's through things like, I think Skaven are in a really good spot to handle those meta armies right now.
Absolutely. And this is a really good example of an allegiance ability that it just supports the choice of hero and supporting units amazingly. Because if you're going to take a Warlock Bombardier or a Warlock Engineer or your Arch-Warlock, you're definitely going to take at least some Scryer units, because really the Engineer's job is to support your Scryer war machines or units. And this just makes them overpowered. It makes them fantastic.
You can do some really cool stuff. And we won't get into those tactics just yet, but sending a unit of Storm Friends, because you don't make friends with Storm Fiends, so I call them Storm Friends. Although that's a hangover from AOS 1, where you had the double battalion, the stupid. It
was when you could pick the models, weapons for the whole unit.
And you jump in within 3 and just burninate literally everything through the tunnel.
Yeah.
But Scryer is always going to be good. It's just really well packed. What are your thoughts on Pestilence? And I hope we haven't jumped too far ahead.
I
would love to talk Pestilence, because it used to be really good. People used to love Pestilence, and you'd see big blocks of Plague Monks. In fact, CanCon last year, I played a Pestilence army. But then Plague Monk's War Scroll got changed. It got reduced. The rules became simpler. And I would say they got probably reduced in their strength. They're not as good as they used to be.
I think they're probably, they're probably not as good as they used to be if you really kind of deck them out the way they used to be decked out, which is to have, blades on some of them and staves on other ones in order to maximize the damage output. But I found that it was frustrating to play on my end, so you can imagine what it's going to be like for your opponent.
The War Scroll was massive. The War Scroll had just so many rules, and there was so many different weapon kit outs, and it did this, and it did this, and it did this, and it was just a nightmare.
So I actually I really like the new simplified, streamlined version, and the damage output's still amazing. So there's no complaints from me there. So with the Pestilence list, I reckon if you were going to go a single list, Pestilence would be my single subfaction, just because I guess they have some of the better kind of melee units in there. So things like the Furnace, the Plague Monks, even if you're going to pick Vermin Lords, the Vermin Lord of Corruption is pretty good. But again, for me to do well in a Skaven army, you almost have to take just broad Skaventide and pick the different units for different things. The weakness, obviously, of a Pestilence is shooting. They don't have Scry's amazing shooting abilities.
You've just got your catapult, right? That's your primary shooting attack,
and it's not great. So yeah, I mean, it's great that it doesn't need line of sight, but it's just not great. So the abilities of Pestilence is, again, not like on paper, it's not amazing, and a lot of it is quite. Thank you.
I mean, I've just been told that Roe was voted the sexiest. Is it Kyneton? Where are you from? Kyneton. You were the sexiest man 2 years in a row. I can definitely see that.
It's true. It's all true. Until he says something mean about me, in which case it's all lies.
And spoiler alert, guys, the second list actually does have Plague Monk, so we can actually bring this a little bit closer to see how Roe is using and building around Plague Monks. So they still have their place. I think people were a bit harsh to throw them away, and I haven't seen them on the table since their War Scroll got changed, and I think that was quite hard on them.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, but the Allegiance ability is basically, and it seems really random because basically it gives you a list of plagues, and they only go off when your priest rolls a 6 on a prayer. So you kind of sit there going, well, is this even useful? If you take like a Plague Furnace, you're going to be rolling 5 dice in a game, so this may not even happen. It might, but it might not. If you're taking like some of the artifacts and command traits that go with it, suddenly that Plague Furnace can be rolling 3 prayers per turn, and then these things start actually kind of coming off fairly reliably. The biggest one I always go for, because it's a very strong and buffing ability, is the last one, which is the ability to re-roll your prayers.
Is that the...
is it the Undulant Scourge? No,
yeah, the Undulant Scourge,
the Never Plague. It's the second last one.
If the Plague manifests, you can reroll prayer rolls for friendly Clan Pestilence for the rest of the battle. Okay, so you get that ASAP. And I guess I imagine if I'm going Pestilence, I want to fill my army with as many priests as possible in order to increase my likelihood of triggering a plague. And then if I can get this Never Plague early, again, I'm just really increasing the opportunity to re-roll my prayer rolls. And even if I'm successful in the prayer roll, I can try to stack that 6.
Yeah, or you take, and it's in, I think it's a command trait for Pestilence. It's an ability to, in addition to whatever prayers you get to use the prayer on the Plague Priest War Scroll. That prayer is different to the Plague Furnace War Scroll. So what happens is, if you take the Plague Furnace with that ability, your Plague Furnace is rolling 3 prayers instead of 1, because in addition to his prayer, he gets the 2 prayers that come in the Plague Priest War Scroll. So it's a huge thing. If you're gonna go prayer heavy, it's great. And then the other thing which helps Pestilence is the Gnawhole, aside from being arcane for your magic heroes, also gives you a +1 to pray for your priests.
That's a wonderful segue, because that was going to be my next question before we get into list tech, which is literally next, guys. Is the Gnawhole placement, because again, this is a really interesting one, because most armies get 1 piece. I think Deepkin's the only one that gets two boats, but you get 3. You get 3 pieces. You get to put on the table, and it's interesting when I talk to Skaven players. Some players like to play them aggressively and put 2 in my deployment zone, 1 in theirs, in their home zone. Some people like to play defensively and go for the magic buff by keeping 2 in their zone and 1 in mine. Or some of them just like to mess with me and probably have no plan, but they just think that I'm going to tunnel Storm Friends. But actually, they just use a little tunneling ability on their punch fist or whatever it is to do that. So how do you see the Gnawholes? How do you place them? Is there any I don't know if you have a strategy the whole time or if it's matchup dependent.
Yeah, it is very matchup dependent. I mentioned before that I see the Skaventide army as a toolbox army. The way you play versus a different player or a different battle plan can be almost like, opposite styles. So like you can, like the way I play against, I've got some out of the guys locally where in Kyneton, we've got destruction players. So I'm looking to counterpunch because I know they're going to be at me turn one. So I'm screening and counterpunching. We've got KO players, in which case I'm literally just dumping myself on objectives and making them go through bodies. There's all sorts of different ways to play it. So it's the answer of how I use Gnawholes is however it suits me and however gives me a bit of an advantage. And I've done it in various ways. And I'll go through one of the examples when we talk about I think one of the lists I've got. But in general, if it's let's say we're playing, Giants or Beast Claw, I will guaranteed throw one Gnawhole at the back of the board in my opponent's territory, because if they've got, 6 units on the table, they're going to have to hold one back, which can be, a quarter of their army, just to babysit a Gnawhole, which I'm probably never going to use anyway. Otherwise, suddenly a whole army turns up behind them and, scores their home objectives. If I'm playing against, fast-moving armies, I'll probably put them maybe halfway up the board or something so I can turn up on objectives when they make me go first, which is one of the downsides of Skaven. The battalions are absolute rubbish. So the idea of having a low-drop Skaven army is just give up. Don't even try to do that. You're going to have a 9-10 drop minimum.
I don't think I've ever seen it. I don't think I've ever seen a Skaven battalion outside of Age of Sigmar 1. Age of Sigmar 1, you had the Scryer double battalion that got changed. I don't think I've ever seen anyone play with a Skaven battalion in the new edition or the new box.
They're not very competitive. I think I saw one recently, which was a double Arcspark Voltag, which is, and again, it's not going to win much, but it's a fun list.
I think the interesting part for the Gnawholes for me as an opponent is, one, you can guarantee yourself, well, not guarantee, but you can increase the likelihood of casting it with the +1 to Arcane. So really good if you've got, even multiple spellcasters, you could keep 2 Gnawholes at the back. Obviously, it's going to help with your endless spells as well. The other part, while the other one is deadly, and that's okay, I think the key is that you can, if you have a unit within, is it 1? What's the teleport? 6, within 6.
Oh, 6. Yeah.
Yeah. It's always that constant threat that you can use the Gnawhole to teleport behind the line. So as my force advances up the board to secure objectives, if you leave a 9-inch gap for them to kind of jump out of the Gnawhole, I've now got a threat behind me that I need to either handle, and I'm now trying to handle the force in front of me and then trying to handle the force in the back of me, or you're going for an objective behind the lines. And then when you add the Storm Fiends, who have a natural tunneling ability with the way that you kit them out, all of a sudden there's now 2 threats. I've got one from the tunneling and one from the Gnawhole. So how do I screen both while protecting my home objectives, while claiming your objectives? Oh, and by the way, you've got a whole bunch of centerpieces who are probably going to shoot me off, like Jezzails, your Bombardiers, so it does force you as an opponent to focus, and it's very interesting. And because a lot of people are used to Storm Friends tunneling, but actually they don't need the Gnawhole to do it. So it does pose some interesting threats.
Yeah, so I do tend to use them in different ways, and I will have to admit one of the ways I use them is just to psych people out. Just put it somewhere where people don't want to be, but have to be if they don't want me to turn up there.
I used to do that with my Legion of Night. I could always put 3 things on the side of the board, and I'd always leave the Terror Geist to the very end to deploy. And people would be screening off the Terror Geist, thinking I was going to put a Terror Geist in reserve, and I never did. But it made them stretch their army out. It made them screen more, and then I could take advantage. So there's a psychological threat as well that you can play around with. But overall, if we ever get to play Row, I can't wait to smash it with one of my 2 gate breakers at Vic GT. Anything else you'd want to say on the Gnawhole, or do we want to get into your first list?
Yeah, no, I'll go back to my Gnawhole. It's one of my key components in one of the little power plays I use in one of my lists. Yeah, Age of Act in both of my lists, but yeah.
No, it's great. It's great. There's just so many mechanics. Skaven to me is a thinking man's or thinking woman, thinking person's army, regardless of how you want to play. Like, it's certainly not Iron Jaws. It's not running up and just smashing and bashing.
No.
It really does take a lot of thinking, and you are thinking turns in advance.
Yeah.
So this is the first list, and correct me if I'm wrong, this is the list that you took to Summer Smash, which was a few weeks ago. But I'll read out the list again for our friends on the podcast in case they can't see it. And talk me through the rationale. You've got so many different options in the Skaven book. Why did you choose what you chose? So I'll read out the list. So you start off with the Grey Seer on Screaming Bell, which is the general. It has the command trait of Master of Magic with the rune of Death Frenzy. You got yourself a Plague Priest on a Plague Furnace. You've got yourself an Arch-Warlock with the Vigor Dust Injector, and you've also got more Warp Power. Used to that one. You've got 20 Clan Rats, 20 Clan Rats, 20 Clan Rats. You've got yourself, one with spears, 2 with blades. You got yourself a unit of 40 Plague Monks. You got yourself a unit of 30 Plague Monks, and you have a unit of 6 Storm Friends. Those Storm Friends have 2 Wind Launchers, 2 Rattling Guns, 2 Shock Gauntlets. So a bit of a mixture of the 3.
Yeah.
So start where you want to start.
Sure.
I guess, yeah, like, again, why did you choose what you chose?
Yeah. So there's a couple of combos. Essentially, all my lists have certain combos that if they go off, and everything goes super well for me, and I'm really happy. And if not, then I'm in trouble. So I've started off with the Realm of Olgu, which has a couple of benefits for me. One is I chose this for Summer Smash because I knew the likes of, Seraphon were going to be quite prevalent, and they were. So I wanted some line of sight blocking stuff, and I know that as much as a lot of things can fly and shoot, Seraphon was one where not as many units will be able to fly and shoot at the same time. So I had a bit of defense there. Obviously, with my own shooting, which are the Storm Fiends down the bottom, I had wind launchers which don't need line of sight. So it was kind of a bit of a here's my defense, and now I'm getting through that same defense should I win the realm roll off. So that was kind of one of the tricks with the Olgu realm to begin with. The other one was the little teleporting ability, which I don't know if you've used that one before.
I haven't played in Olgu yet.
It's an awesome ability. So what happens is you use a command point to, at the end of the movement phase, you pick a unit that's wholly within 18 inches of a hero and redeploy them within 6 inches of that hero. So what I do is I'll throw forward something like the Plague Furnace or the Screaming Bell, and then just teleport my Storm Fiends right in front of them. So what happens is, obviously, like, people are expecting me to come through a Gnawhole, and are suddenly screening them off and potentially leaving the middle of the board empty. And then there's, rattling cannons and wind launchers in your face.
And that's the other thing as well, is that now that the Gnawholes are on the table, as long as you've got something within 6 inches, it's always a threat. So even in turn one, as long as you're keeping something around range, it's always going to be a threat that people can't ignore. Yeah. So the Grey Seer on Screaming Bell, Master of Magic is giving you +1 to cast, which is awesome, as well as +1 to dispel and unbind. So put that near a Gnawhole. It's +2 to the cast. I was looking at your command traits, and there isn't that many good ones. I mean, maybe the Savage Overlord to get +1 bravery when they're within 18 might be worth it, but I feel like that +1 for casting, dispelling, and unbinding is probably just too good to walk away from.
Absolutely, especially because the other reason the Screaming Bell is there is for Death Frenzy, which is a spell that goes off on a 7, so it's not a given. So I kind of need that +1 and +2 to get off. Death Frenzy lets you one unit attack when a model is slain. And the cool thing about this is, obviously, especially if you're used to new books, there's a lot of limitations. It's like, slain with melee weapons, or slain in the combat phase, or slain by shooting, or this one's just slain. So when they battle shock off, they attack. when they're when they're magicked off in the hero phase, they can attack. So it's an amazing ability, and what it is a massive deterrent to actually hitting a blob of, let's say, plague monks, which is probably what I use them on 99% of the time. So you chuck Death Frenzy on plague monks, buff them up, throw them at the enemy. If you don't get into combat, great, because it means that they've spent an entire turn avoiding you. If they do get into combat, they're going to kill whatever they face.
I tell you what, like, I know other spells that have worked really well, at least my terms of references, Dan Brewer and Thomas Holdsworth are my two big Skaven opponents. I know a few others, but they're the two ones that I play probably the most with. I know Warp Gale and Skitter Leap are ones that they use a lot as well, especially like when I look at Warp Gale, not only does it do mortal wounds, and it's quite far, like 26 inches from the caster is quite a generous range. And
it has been...
has that one been changed, has it?
It's been nerfed. It's 13.
Okay, all right. Well, that's all right.
Which is why it's only used by KO now, because they teleport in front of you and drop it.
Warp Gale.
Sorry. Warp. Oh no, Warp Gale.
I'm not talking Warp Lightning Vortex. Then I'm talking Warp Gale. The spell.
Oh yeah, no, Warp Gale is still 26.
Yeah, I was like, wait, what? Warp Gale? Yeah, I didn't think Warp Gale got changed. Yes, the Warp Lightning Vortex, the endless spell, has gotten changed, yes, but no, Warp Gale also then suffers D3 mortal wounds, and then any run and charge rolls are halved. So considering you can hit them 26 inches away and then reduce their speed by half, making a half charge roll is just nasty, and it stops them from flying. So that's such a jerk move. The Terror Geist like walking up the board slowly, the Maw Crusher walking up the board slowly. Just like you watch their face and they just cry.
Yeah, the only problem with that one is you need something like a super powerful caster. Like you probably need to take Thankwell just to make sure it goes off. Yeah,
because it's an 8 cast, so you need to find yourself Arcane Terrain and find yourself a Gnawhole or something.
Which you can't get both, because the Gnawhole is Arcane, so you can't double your Arcane.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
So you really need to get something like Thankwell with its default +2 to cast in order to actually kind of not guarantee, but have a good chance of that going off.
8's a pretty hard number to cast, but you got yourself your Grey Seer and Screaming Bell. It's giving you good spellcaster. It gives you battle shock immunity within 13. It gets the Lookout Sir rule because it's a hero, but it's not a monster, which is very cool. It surprised me when I fought them. Anything else that the Grey Seer brings to the party?
Aside from that battle shock immunity and the casting of Death Frenzy, not a whole lot. The other thing it really has going for it, which you kind of got to be a little bit reactive on, is the random roll on the bell. You roll 2 dice at the start of the hero phase, and you roll 2 1s and you start taking mortals. You roll 2 6s and a Verminlord appears, and in between that, a whole lot of other stuff can happen. Like you can get bonuses to move, you can get bonuses to cast, you can get
D3 mortal wounds. There's track 1 to hit. So there's some nice little things. I've never seen a Verminlord pop up.
I have a couple of times.
If it does happen, I would cheer. I would high five my opponent if they can pull a Verminlord on a 6/6.
So I've been to Summer Smash twice, and my opening round's always been against a really nice guy called Daniel Trotter, and both times I've summoned a Verminlord against the poor guy.
he's probably writing to GW FAQ saying like it needs a nerf. Like this poor guy's having horror stories from the free Verminlords. It happens rarely. But the thing is, what I find with that random roll, there's always a use. If you can get like plus D6 inches movement on a Screaming Bell, amazing. It means you can push your units that much further forward and keep them immune to battle shock. If you're dishing out mortals at 26 inches, amazing. The most common one, which obviously goes off on a 7, is +1 to cast, which actually makes your casting even that much better. So it's always useful, even if it's pretty average, like just the movement one. There's always something you can do with it, maybe with the exception of taking mortals. I'll tell you what, though, if you can roll a 10 or 11, the Wall of Unholy Sound, causing -1 to hit within the Pearl of Doom bubble, when that Screaming Bell is unwounded, between the bracket of 0 and 3 wounds taken, That's a 26-inch range -1 to hit bubble. That's massive. And then, you know, you've got the Lookout Sir stuff as well.
And the 5-up after save.
Damn.
Yeah, they're hard to kill. And so the Screaming Bell, I mean, I wouldn't say that that particular role always wins your games, but there's always something you can do with it to make, you know, give yourself an advantage. If it's the movement one, move the Screaming Bell into the middle of the board, ready for the next turn where it might roll a -1 to hit or something like that.
And it happens at the start of the
models.
And it happens at the start of the hero phase as well. So it allows you to plan out your phase. It's not like it happens in the movement phase and then you wish you had it for the hero phase. So it gives you some good options.
So that's what I was saying. You have to be a bit reactive with what you do with it, but like it presents opportunities, which is really what Skaven's about.
I'm getting people in the chat saying that they've summoned free Vermin Lords as well, and they agree with me that the -1 to hit bubble is up there. Oh, it's so good, and it's a double caster as well. It's just I can definitely see this being the centerpiece. It's one that you always want to have in your army, unless you're probably Pestilence. If you're Pestilence, you probably don't take this. But even then, there's probably an argument still to take it.
Well, the benefit is, even if you're Pestilence, you can take, you know, a Master Clan commander. So sorry, as your leader or as your general, which means, you know, you can actually take the Screaming Bell and everything else Pestilence and not lose your allegiance. Yeah, but like I said, there's very little benefit to, you know, to going for a sub allegiance, because all you do is you limit yourself in terms of the units you get to choose from.
Yeah, as in Default Game is saying in the chat that Skaven are in the land of cheap double casters, and I absolutely agree. And then you got people like Zed in the chat saying that he runs a Screaming Bell, Thanquil, and a Bombardier. So that's just, whew.
Yeah, like you can actually build like strong casting armies. Like even your Grey Seer on foot, even in this meta, like the ability for the Grey Seer to roll 3 dice to cast and pick the 2 highest ones is strong. And then if there is something really urgent like that you just really want to get off, you try it with your Grey Seer, because if you roll those 3 dice and it's a 13, your Grey Seer dies, but that spell can't be unbound. So there are opportunities where you can outcast, you know, the casting armies with Skaven.
And casting is definitely getting harder in the game right now, especially when we've got supercasters like Nagash, the Lord of Change, Lord Croak, Teclis. You know, even Archeon's running around at the moment eating spells through Dogar. So getting some more consistency is going to be key. But I think the Grey Seer on Screaming Bell is an absolute, you know, don't leave home without it, just type of unit. I'm sure there's cases where you don't, but it's just, you know, it's a great centerpiece.
I think it's been a good year and a half since I've not taken a Screaming Bell. Plague Furnace is the same. It's the immune to Battle Shock buff and the prayer, which I use on Plague Monks, and I'll go through my Plague Monks when I talk about them. And the Arch-Warlock is again amazing. Vigor Dust Injector, +1 to hit, +1 to charge.
That's for a unit, right? It's not for itself, it's for a unit.
No, it's for a unit. You pick a unit wholly within 12 inches. Yeah. So all you do is and this is where I guess my tactic of buffing up a unit and throwing it outside of the bubble. You just buff them up, you throw them out, you let them die, you buff up the next unit, you throw them at the opponent, let them die.
And this is Skaven as well, Rob saying that my Grey Seer has blown himself up every time he's done the 3 dice. He's truly blessed. Absolutely. Like that's just the way things work. And a maths check's being told it's like a 10% chance of a 13 on 3d6. So
it's not that unlikely.
It always happens. But that's amazing. So your Plague Priest on Furnace is giving you a bit more of a centerpiece buff, and again supporting. Why not run 2 Grey Seers on Screaming Bells? Why run 1 of each?
So this comes down to my Plague Monk buffs. So the Plague Priest on Plague Furnace gives you a spell where you can either add 1 to the attacks characteristic of a Pestilence unit or reroll wounds. So either option, I tend to go reroll wounds because I like my reliability ahead of my spike damage. You put that on 40 Plague Monks and the damage output just increases by a huge amount.
So what you're finding is your Plague Priest on your Plague Furnaces combining with your Plague Monks, and then your Grey Seer on Screaming Bells probably more combining with your Clan Rats. So you've got these two little like wizard chariots.
Actually, no. Everything's used to buff a unit. So, for example, Death Frenzy, and this comes down to my Plague Monk tactics. So, Death Frenzy goes on the Plague Monks.
Yeah, let's go talk about it. We've alluded from Plague Monks for a few times now. Before we get there, does that mean your Clan Rats are screens? They're just blocking up the board?
My Clan Rats are there to get in the way of things, steal objectives, and die.
Okay. So they're screens, they're bodies, they're clogging up the board, they're being annoying.
Yeah.
The real power is coming from the Plague Monks and your Storm Friends.
Yeah. So, 20 Clan Rats at 120 points is cheap. To be honest, and you'll see this in my next build, 40 Clan Rats are better because 200 points for 40 wounds is just, stupidly cheap. But all they are is streets. They don't actually do a lot in terms of damage output. They can be a little bit annoying in terms of hanging around because they do, although they have a 6-up save, they have a +1 when there's more than 10 of them. So a 5-up save is not terrible. And then they also have that ability to retreat and charge.
I was just about to say that. I think the lesson that I had learnt by fighting Clan Rats is normally when you have attrition and you take down a unit down to like 2 or 3, you're like, I can ignore them now. I don't have to worry about those Clan Rats. But those little 3 dudes or 2 dudes or 7 dudes or whatever is left from the Clan Rat unit, being able to retreat and charge. Again, you mentioned, wrapping around and kind of retreating and onto home objectives.
Yeah.
Either you waste a whole bunch of attacks trying to handle these little couple of rats running around objectives, or they're annoying the crap out of you stealing.
Or you if you're playing against Fire Slayers, you tag the end of a Hearthguard unit and only 4 of them get to attack, and then they run away and hit the squishy heroes behind them. So it can be really strong, depending on how you use them, but you got to use them intelligently because as much as they are useful and versatile, they'll die like anything.
Yeah, I mean, they've got a 6-up armor save +1, and they've got a shield while they've got 10 or more models. And now the cool thing as well is you get +2 to the charge from the rat, the bell ringer.
Yeah, to run, I believe.
Sorry, to run. Sorry, yeah, it's run. Yeah, it's run roll.
But what it means is that you roll a 6 or you force a 6, and they're moving 14 inches, which is insane.
Yeah.
But I use them mainly for screening. Making sure that whatever their hard hitting units are hitting Clan Rats rather than Plague Monks. And then,
you want them to soak up damage. You want them to hold objectives back. You want to claim objectives and take the initial brunt, and then the Plague Monks, the Storm Fiends, 20 Clan Rats, they're dirt cheap. They're so good.
They are. So the way I've got my Clan Rats is just for screening, and then my Plague Monks and my Storm Fiends are doing the actual work.
And you've gone 40 and 30. Is that because you've just run out of points? I look at this, right, and you've got there's 40 points different for 10 more Plague Monks. Surely you got 40 points somewhere. Surely you're selling your next of kin just to get 40 more points.
Storm Fiends are very expensive, and you'll see my next list is this list I kind of took because I basically I wanted to have a game where I could drink a bit more beer, basically. So my next list has well over 200 models. And
let's not ruin Christmas. Let's not ruin Christmas. They know there's a present coming. Let's anticipate.
So this is my fun list, and the fun list involves 6 Storm Fiends.
So what you're saying is that you're probably better off because whenever I find Storm Fiends, I always find the unit of 6. I mean, this is such a stupid comment, but a unit of 6 is just so much better than a unit of 3. When I look at a unit of 3, I've never been phased with them. When someone throws 3 at me, because they're 6 wounds each, unless the combat dude's got 7 wounds, I can handle them pretty easily. But when there's 6 of them, and they are big bases, so the likelihood of you getting all 6 into combat is pretty low. But it's just a lot of wounds. It's just a big. It's like fighting Nurgle. It's just a big block of wounds, and they do a lot of damage, and they'll tie you up for such a long time.
And they're scary. The damage output in shooting is actually very scary in a block of 6. In a block of 3, they'll do a bit of damage, but usually not enough to necessarily wipe entire units. In a block of 6, they will wipe entire units.
Yeah, block of 3 to me is just like a little harasser unit. A unit of 6 is a true anvil. Like, they will tie you down. They'll do some damage. It'll take you a lot of effort to take down 6, especially with the dude with 7 wounds.
But as you can see, at 520 points, they're also damn expensive.
One of the questions that I want to ask before we unpack the Storm Fiends a little bit more, and I think you had the Arch-Warlock. We've also talked about the Bombardier. So why didn't you take the Bombardier in this list? Because I've played a whole bunch of Skaven, and probably the list that I've played the most recently is having like a double Bombardier.
So for me, it's reliability. Yeah, for me, it's reliability. So if I'm going to take a Bombardier or an Engineer, I need 2 because I need redundancy because they're going to die. With an Arch-Warlock, he's got a 3-up save and 6 wounds. He's at 160 points. He's actually probably cheaper than 2 Bombardiers in terms of points and in terms of survivability. So it's more a matter of, if I'm going to rely on my Arch-Warlock and he does, like Vigordust Injector is really purely for Plague Monks, and it's important for Plague Monks. More warp power is essential for Storm Fiends to actually have any kind of damage output because they basically hit on a 4-up. Without the re-rolling hits and wounds, they actually reduce quite significantly in their potential to do damage. That Arch-Warlock is very, very key to my entire army. So if he can be picked off by a little bit of sniping, I'm in big trouble.
And the chat is absolutely in your corner. Rob saying that, definitely worth taking an Arch-Warlock more than, 2 Bombardiers. I think people are just 100% agreeing that having the Arch-Warlock is just such a better decision than the Bombardiers. Obviously, the Bombardier brings some value, but as you've mentioned, the synergies that the Arch-Warlock is bringing to the table and the survivability is just far better than the Bombardiers.
Yeah, if you're going to take a lot of Scry units, then sure, bring a second one because you can, probably maybe not entirely buff, but like you can use Sparks with one of them. You can, buff Warp Lightning Cannons with the other one. Yeah.
The last list I played with the double Bombardiers had 2 big blocks of Jezzails. They had like Jezzails on each side. I think it was a unit of 6 or a unit of 9, like 2 units of Jezzails, a Bombardier on each side, and then the unit of 6 Storm Fiends and things like that.
Yeah.
That
so
probably wouldn't
they're
work.
both doing multiple jobs. Yeah. So in my list, because I've only got a little bit of Scryer, which is filling out the shooting portion of my army, I need one good Scryer wizard to support them.
Yeah, that's neat. Is there any other way you'd kit out your Storm Fiends, or is this the way you've chosen?
It's from what I can tell the best way. The wind launchers have 24-inch range with not needing line of sight, neg 3 ren, D3 damage. They're really, really amazing. And then the rattling cannons just do the rest, especially because you can do things like turn up through a Gnawhole 9 inches away. They've got 12-inch range, so they can actually just turn up somewhere and shoot. I know that some people do take things like the grinders, which let them tunnel.
Yeah.
But what I find is, there are other ways to tunnel. So, if you're gonna the Ulgu command ability that lets you throw them forward, I think there's that endless spell, the bridge.
I had to say I remember playing. I think it was Corey up in Queensland, and he threw he threw the Soul Scream bridge at me.
Yeah.
With the Screaming Bell and a unit of Plague Monks. So that was a way that he was able to bring his units forward, and then because there's a hero there, he could re-roll the charge and do all this cool stuff. But so
it's super strong.
So the option for tunneling is there, but you just think that going, because I'm seeing in the chat here, gauntlets versus flayers for the melee guys. I guess pros and cons, but
they equate to almost the same. The gauntlets has a little bit more spike damage because they explode dice on a 6 to hit. But for me, if my Storm Fiends are in melee and need melee output, I'm probably doing something a little bit wrong. unless they're hitting something really soft, in which case I don't care that they're not necessarily putting a lot of output into it. What they're really there for is the shooting.
Yeah, I was going to say I find Storm Fiends are about the shooting, and then the combat is the mop up. They're not going in. They're not trying to do combat first. They are shooting first, and then actually, there's been times where I've had tunneling Storm Fiends pop up, do a whole bunch of shooting, and they could charge, but they choose not to. They just want to sit on an objective, and with their big block of wounds, just hold.
There's a big risk with Storm Fiends where if you do throw them into melee and you don't wipe out the unit that is in melee, the next turn of shooting is wasted on the couple of models that are left standing there in front of them.
Well, I actually battle shocked one or two of them off the last time I played. I can't remember. Yeah. I think it might have been at least one. I remember.
Yeah, they're only bravery 6.
I remember laughing my ass off at least battle shocking one, because you've thrown them and overextended. There's no hero to inspiring presence them. So it was a very expensive battle shock for that Skaven player.
Yeah. They're not there to throw into melee.
No, be smart. Don't just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Absolutely.
Anything else you'd call out with this particular list? I mean, you're just under 200 wounds. You're 2,000 points on the nose. You've got yourself three battle line. There's not a lot of battle line, but you've got some screens. You've got some nice juicy 2 units of plague monks, the Storm Fiends, some nice little buff pieces from the Grey Seer and the plague priests, both on their wizard wagons. As well as the Arch-Warlock, which we've already talked about as being a bit more survivable than, say, the Bombardier.
Yeah. I was saying, I guess at the start of this list, I built this list for a bit of fun, so I could, throw some things around, throw Storm Fiends in people's face, and watch them, make some stuff disappear, and generally have some fun. And it was a great fun list. It's probably not my competitive list, but it was very, very enjoyable. And I guess relative to what I'd call my usual kind of method of playing Skaven, it was a lot less work.
In saying all of that, Ro, you did go 3 and 2 with this list. So despite it being a quote unquote fun list, guys, make no mistake, this is not a bottom, wooden spoon type of list. It's still 3-2 at a very competitive.
I think I finished 12th out of 50 for that one.
Come on, guys! I just didn't want to discredit this list because it's still a very good list.
It was a good list, yeah.
And we'll go. Let's go to the other list because I think that's a little bit more competitive. It's got the same kind of bones. It's the same bones because normally at this point I would have said to you, how would you make it more competitive? But I know for a fact that the next list has the same bones, but you've kind of kitted it out a little bit. So the second list we've got, you'll notice some commonality. We've got the Grey Seer on Screaming Bell. It's the general. It's got the command trait of Master of Magic. You're still coming from the realm. Oh, no, you're coming from the realm of Gur, not Ulgu. You were Ulgu before. You got the Plague Priest on the Plague Furnace. You've got the Arch-Warlock. Again, same kit out with Vigor Dust and more warp power. Now, we've got a different loadout here. We've got 40 Clan Rats with the Spears. You've got 20 Clan Rats with the Blades. You've got 20 Clan Rats with the Blades. You've got 2 units of 20 Acolytes. Oh, good Lord. I've only ever fought 1 unit of Acolytes. I don't think I've ever fought 2 units of Acolytes because normally I would fight Jezzails as well. You've got 2 units of Acolytes. You've got a unit of 40 Plague Monks. You've got a unit of 40 Plague Monks. So this is over 200 wounds. It's 232 wounds on the nose of 2,000 points again. Now, with your leader... I should point out that I actually take the Plague Monks with staves instead of blades. Okay. Is that for both of the units or is that for just one of them? Okay, so why that? Why the staves?
So the staves have 2-inch range. And when you've got blocks of 40 of them, if they're touching base to base, then 3 rows of Plague Monks can hit something.
Gotcha. Yeah. I've noticed that both of your lists don't have any of the endless spells, both either your generic endless spells or your Skaven endless spells. Is it because you've the Warp Lightning Vortex got kind of reduced in its power, or is it you just finding more value in your units as opposed to spells?
I think there's a lot more value in the units. The only endless spell I'd really consider is the Bell of Doom.
Yeah. People are pumped about 40 acolytes. Unfortunately, if you're going to buy the legit models, you buy them in blister packs of 1, and I think they're metal.
Like $20-something per. So I'm using Blood Bowl rats and converting them.
Yeah, neat.
Yeah.
Take me through the top. So you've got the same loadout. You've got everything that we just talked about with the Gracier and Screaming Bell, with Death Frenzy, Master of Magic, the Plague Priest on the Plague Furnace, the Arch-Warlock with the same loadout. Do they play the same role, or have you found with the unit selections they have a different role?
They do exactly the same thing in both armies.
So
it's all about battle shock immunity, the Arch-Warlock buffing the Plague Monks with Vigorous Injector, buffing the Acolytes with more warp power. The Furnace is giving the reroll wounds to Plague Monks. The Screaming Bells putting Death Frenzy on Plague Monks.
Okay.
So yeah, it all comes down to, again, I'm screening. This time I've got way more clan rats, which I prefer. Having a block of 40 clan rats is so good.
Why? Why is it good? Why is it better to take a unit of 40 clan rats as opposed to what you previously had, which was units of 20?
So the 40 clan rats, first of all, is stupidly cheap at 200 points. Like, it's insanely cheap. Like 80 points for 20 clan rats is unbelievable. To be honest, if I had spare points, it would probably go into upgrading one of the other units to 40 as well. Its bodies, its movement, it's got all the things clan rats have. It's your biggest, you can screen your entire army with 40 clan rats. So it's got a lot of kind of versatility. And again, if something big and hard hitting hits into them, because you're within that kind of battle shock bubble, you're not going to run out of clan rats anytime soon. So, I can lose 28 clan rats and have 8 sitting there in front of, say, a Maw Crusher, ready for me to counter hit them with Plague Monks or something.
Reminds me of when I play with my Gits. I'd have a unit of 60 Gits near my Loon Shrine, which has Battle Shock immunity within 12 inches. And even if my Gits had extended out from the Loon Shrine, I just keep pulling models, dragging myself closer to the Loon Shrine, and then I'm just Battle Shock immune. So if I don't want to spend a CP. So I think having 80 bodies, up to 80 bodies from the clan rats as screens to stop those eels coming from the side of the board, to avoid those Maw Crushers. Even if the OBR catapults go at you, you just cool story, bro.
Yeah, I've lost a lot of clan rats. Great. But yeah, the real tech is in the Scries and the Plague Monks in this list. And again, I'm making use of the realm, which is the realm of beasts in this case, Gur. My standard move with this list is to start with Death Frenzy, Vigordust Injector, reroll wounds, and the realm spell, which is +2 to charge, all on one unit of Plague Monks. Send them through a Gnawhole 9 inches away from an enemy. And that gives me essentially a 5+ to charge. Okay,
so you're able to get...
Yeah, because so the Plague Monks have a default +1 to charge on their War Scroll.
Yeah, that's
Vigordust Sorry?
Oh, that's just from one of the standard...
it's just on their War Scroll.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then +1 to charge from Vigordust Injector, and +2 to charge from the Gur spell, which means 9 inches away, 5+ charge.
And if you really wanted to guarantee that, you could get cogs and get +2 to that if you wanted. If that was a strategy you were building around, and you just wanted to minimize the failure rate, you could then bring that down to a 3-inch charge. So,
but the benefit is Death Frenzy. Whether if I don't make the charge, I've got a block of 40 models there that as soon as you touch them are going to murder you. So and again with the buffs and with the the overwhelming mass and everything, you get to that point where it is Plague Monks hitting on 2s, wounding on 3s, re-rolling wounds, 6s to wound, do extra damage. When they die, they attack on that profile again, and then do a mortal to you on a 6.
I remember at the height of Plague Monks, I was playing Death. I was playing Legions of Nagash, and I hated it so much. I hate Plague Monks because you've got no tools, you've got no shooting. So all I had was like 8-inch kind of breath weapons, and I'm like,
so you got to hit them.
Yeah, and there's like 120 Plague Monks running around. I'm like,
yeah,
but they are
so
still.
that's why, yeah.
There is a lot of shooting now in the meta, so if an opponent is listening to this, you want to shoot them ASAP before they get into combat. Anything you can to get rid of those Plague Monks, and vice versa. Anything you can do to protect them as a Skaven player, because once you get into combat, that's where you get the real value of them dying. But anything prior to combat, it's just wasted wounds and wasted potential.
Absolutely. Ideally, you want them in enemy territory on an objective, and you're forcing someone to actually take you off it or kill you off it in order to win it.
Yeah, no, they're neat. And again, you've got 2 blocks of 40. Any reason why you didn't go the 30? Because you mentioned you'd love to increase another unit of clan rats. Why not drop those Plague Monks and get 2 units of 40 clan rats instead?
So with this list, you can kind of whittle down my damage to those last 4 units. There's like all my damage comes from 2 blocks of 40 Plague Monks and 2 blocks of 20 Acolytes. Like the rest of my army doesn't do a lot of damage. So the option is, do I take more screening and less damage, or less screening and more damage? And I kind of find this is a decent balance. There's enough screening there to protect against double turn in most cases, and should it get to the point where I'm really against the wall, something like Death Frenzy can really save me, because I can use my Plague Monks as a screen and kill the opponent's models as they attack. So there's kind of all sorts of things you can do here, but basically it's to maximize my damage output.
Lee in the chat made a really good point as well. The last list compared to this list, with your Plague Monks that used to be 30, when they take 1 wound, you lose half of that overwhelming mass buff, because you get +1 to hit when you are 20 or more, and +1 to wound when you're 30 or more. So by having a unit 30, you take 1 wound as 1 arcane bolt, and you've lost +1 to wound. So by having the block of 40, it's just going to mean that you've got 11 or 10 wounds, 11 wounds, until you lose that +1 to wound as well. So
that's right.
Love it. It's brutal, and 40 wounds from Plague Monks for 300 points is actually good value. 280.
It's very cheap, especially for the work they do. It's very cheap.
Yeah, you'll spend more than 300 points trying to handle that unit.
Very much so. And then the Acolytes are essentially there for shooting over the top of something.
Talk to me about the Acolytes, because I think there's some things that people are kind of catching up on. People are used to your Jezzails. Jezzails are a lot more common. Even like the Warp Fire. What's the little teams? The Warp. Team.
Like the weapon teams. Yep.
Yeah, because you got things like the Isle of Blood and things like that. But Acolytes are becoming more and more popular. It's just that they're hard to access because of the price, and just they're really old sculpt. But talk to me about how the power comes out of the Acolytes, because they are brutal. You mentioned the +1 damage. You talked about the Warpstone Spark. You've got to protect these guys at all costs. They are the #1 target that I want to take down as an opponent.
Yeah. So the power from the Acolytes, it comes from a couple of things. First of all, they've got movement out the arse. So basically, they can run and shoot. So again, you throw that that command point into making them auto go 6 inches, and they're running 12 inches up the board and they only have an 8-inch shooting range. So obviously, they're not going to shoot squishy heroes at the back of the board, and they're not going to teleport through Gnawholes or anything like that and actually be able to shoot anything, because their range is an inch too short. So they are really kind of counter strike. So what you do is, again, if you've got the screens, which in this list I do, you put them a good 12 inches or a bit more behind your clan rat screens or your Plague Monks. And it becomes another deterrent. It's like, well, I'm about to hit a useless screen of clan rats with a guaranteed, shooting round of acolytes the next turn. So it just becomes a bit of a, well, is this even worth it?
Yeah, like when I played against acolytes, they're normally around the screaming bell. So you've got like a nice big block of clan rats, kind of bubble wrapping, and then at least a couple of inches, because again, it's only 8 inches. And if you are being behind a unit of clan rats, run and still shoot doesn't mean a lot. When you look at the 8 inches, you're like you look at his profile on base, 8 inches, fours, Ren 2 for D3. So, you think yourself you're going to get 1-2 good attacks. But if you can protect them with the clan rats, you just keep them away from opponents. They just sit at the back, just burn.
And they're a huge threat. Like, the likes of, like the big things, Archaon, Terrorgeists, they don't fear melee because they'll kill it on the way down. They'll kill it before it even gets to attack. They'll kill it a second time before, you get to go again, all those kind of abilities. Whereas if they get hit by massive rend, and especially if you buff your acolytes, so a lot of those, because they do only have 1 attack each, so your 20 acolytes are doing 20 shots, but 24 ups re-rolling followed by 20, like let's say it's about 16 4-ups re-rolling with D3 plus 1 damage from your spark. Suddenly, they're killing an Archaon or a Terrorgeist in turn, no worries.
Well, as I told you at the start of the show, I got 60 damage put on my my Colossal Squig. So even, yes, the Colossal Squig's only got like a 5-up armor save, but you think about that damage output. And Ren 2, is no joke. That's still a lot of damage. So, and, once you've got 10 models or more, you get +1 to hit from the gas clouds, and then obviously the +1 from being in Skaven as well. So, you really, putting a lot of damage in, but you got to make the most of that 8 inch because that's not a lot.
No, and that's where, again, for me, this particular list in particular, but also the army as a whole, is a really good toolbox. Because let's say there is cases, and the perfect example for me is KO, because I played it a little bit locally. You're playing against KO, your acolytes aren't going to do anything because 20 inches is not going to actually get you shooting an ironclad because it'll disappear again well before then. Your plague monks won't necessarily reach it. Things will disappear and turn up at the other side of the board. Your heroes get picked off. In those kind of situations, what I've got here is enough bodies to hold 3-4 objectives for 3 rounds, and that's enough to win a game.
The acolytes will, and like I'm looking at the chat, and something like Ironjaws doesn't have the tools to be able to get in. They're going to have to do a lot of damage to get through those clan rats to get to the acolytes. Then on the flip side, your Skaven, or even like your Seraphon doing mortal wounds from range, or your Salamanders from Seraphon, they'll just pick them off easily. So I think the great thing as well is that, even though someone's attacking your acolytes, it means people aren't attacking your plague monks. You've got multiple threats. So if I ignore the plague monks and go for the acolytes, the plague monks are going to get into combat and they'll just dice you up, or vice versa, flip it around.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's always some kind of threat. Like you can get rid of probably a good half my army, and there's still threat in my army.
Yeah, no, it's brutal. Anything else you'd call out with this particular list? I mean, it's awesome. You got your 2 units of 40 plague monks. You got your 20, 2 units of 20 acolytes. We talked about the screens. We talked about the clan rats. They're there not to do damage. They're there just to take up objectives, to screen off, to pin you and use the retreat and charge mechanics. Maybe even to be a threat during the Gnawhole. So a 20 can take advantage of the Gnawhole as well and go for a late game objective, especially when you've got a very small unit.
Yeah, absolutely. I think probably just to reiterate what you said near the start, Skaven is very much like a thinking person's army. Like there isn't a scenario where you just go, I'm going to do this every single game, every single time, because it doesn't work that way. You're always kind of playing towards the objective and the outcomes you're looking for, and that could be a different style and different method each time.
I find, and correct me if I'm wrong, this is just an assumption based off my opponents. I don't find Skaven players generally have a solid game plan. It's not like turn one, I'm going to do this, this, and this, and then I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. You know, you can pick Deepkin's game plan from a mile away. The minute you see Eels, the minute you see Volturnus, the minute you see a Soul Scryer, you know they're going to do this. But when you see Skaven List, to me, Skaven seems like one of the best counter-attack armies. You give away the first turn, you see what your opponent's going to do, and then you plan and you manipulate accordingly. You choose certain things to come up from the Gnawholes. You know, you play the game appropriately, but it's very much about counterattack.
Yeah, it's kind of forced it to be that way in the sense of almost every time you're either alphaed or forced to go first in a position where you can't do a lot. So you know, if you're alphaed, obviously your first move is to counterattack. And if you do get outdropped, which is a very regular thing, and someone positions them in a way that you're never going to reach them, your first move is literally setting up, being ready for a double turn, but potentially being ready to act if you do get the next round.
Yeah, like, if you do get the first turn, you really move that big wave of clan rats up on the board, seize those objectives, position the screaming bell to kind of immune to battle shock, and it's like, cool, I've now got 40 units, 40 models or 20 models on an objective. Come fight me, and you can obviously take the charge. And then you might countercharge with those plague marks, countercharge with those storm fiends, shoot me off the board with the acolytes because I can't get to you. So, you can take first and set yourself up, or you can, take second and respond appropriately. And because your battalions are not that very good, you just don't have to worry about the drops. Like it's going to be. I don't think a Skaven player's ever beat me on the drops. Like I feel like I've always had the choice.
I'd be surprised if a Skaven player ever outdropped giants or ogres or any of those kind of low drop lists.
The Cities of Sigmar that has most of the Sigmar, I don't really take battalions in that. I think I've always got to choose in that. So
I think a low drop Skaven list would be like 8.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and that might be a scroll list where you're putting more of your points in big blocks as opposed to 2020s, a couple of buff heroes.
Yeah, like it just means that every turn, whether you're going first or second, you're literally looking at the board at that moment, going, "Great, what do I change in my game plan to win?" Which is exciting. It's really interesting, and it's one of the things I really love about Skaven.
And you've got the randomness of the Warpstone Sparks. You've got hey, the double 6 and get yourself a free Vermin Lord. If you want to, and that's the thing is, if you want to have some more combat punch from Rose List, for example, you might, I don't know, pull one of the Grey Seer or the Plague Priest and get yourself a Vermin Lord Corruptor or a Vermin Lord. That's a wonderful model to jump from a Gnawhole. Give it a realm artifact or some type of artifact. And I mean, you don't have the sort of judgment anymore. That was the last time I played a Vermin Lord. But, that can be a nice little combat monster. We talked about Thankful. Get yourself Thankful to get yourself some additional casting. Is there any endless spells that might work with this type of list? I spoke about cogs if you wanted to increase your likelihood of charging. Is there any other ones that might work well?
So you could always take things like the Emerald Life Swarm, because Skaven innately has no healing. Unless you're going Molder, which is not very competitive, you don't have the option. Like, for example, your Screaming Bell takes a couple of mortals, and suddenly your range is down to 20 inches or 18 inches. How do you get that back? You can't. So something like Emerald Life Swarm will be good. Or again, if your screens have been hit hard and you want those screens back, Emerald Life Swarm. So that's a really good one. The Bell of Doom I mentioned before is awesome.
That's your endless spell. I've never played against the Bell. Usually I see it's a conversion with a Grey Seer on the Bell, but I don't think I've actually ever seen the Bell on the table. What does it do?
So the Bell of Doom, it's essentially a little mobile battle shock bubble. So think of your Screaming Bell or your Furnace, except this one you throw forward with, let's say, your unit of Storm Vermin, Storm Fiends, Plague Monks. You cast it forward with them, and then that battle shock bubble goes along with them. But if you, I think at the end of, I think it's when it's set up and the movement phase, you roll 3 dice again, and if it's a 13, it explodes and does mortals to everyone around it. It's the Bell of Doom, but the thing is, you also through using it, your forward unit, which you're kind of throwing away, suddenly becomes a little bit of a tank as well, because it's not going to run away. But on top of that, when it comes to the next round and you or your opponent get to move it, if your opponent moves it, do they move it away from your army so that you don't get the the buff, in which case they're probably moving it towards themselves, or do they move it into your army and try and explode it? But if they don't explode it, you're immune to battle shock.
Damn if you do, damned if you don't. And I don't have the wall scroll in front of me, but Rob was calling out as well that it's not wholly within, so it's great for your horde units. So that's super handy, especially just to keep those big blocks that might be strung out as well. So and then people like Jen are saying that the Bell of Doom is blown up after its casting. So that's Skaven, man. That is Skaven. Is there a place for the Doom Wheel? Because in my mind, when I come from Warhammer Fantasy Battles, that was where I started Warhammer. I'm OG. Look at the old man beard here, and the screaming, not screaming bell, the hamster wheel, the Doom Wheel was like a staple of a Skaven list, and I'm yet to see it. I'm yet to see it on the table.
It is amazing. It suffers from, I guess, unreliability, which is why you won't see it in competitive lists. It is such a fun thing to play, and outside of tournaments, I've got a Doom Wheel, I want more. I would take the Doom Wheel for a fun game anytime, because it is always fun. And it still has that risk reward where, like, you can roll the dice to move, and if you're not happy with it, you can re-roll it. But if you roll any of those dice as a 1, your opponent moves it instead. So it still has those kind of crazy rules, which is so much fun. But you can't do that in a tournament and expect to actually win.
This guy's the boss. AOS Pete, the boss. He's going to run a triple Doom Wheel list. That is my type of army. I want to run an all steam tank list versus an all Doom Wheel list. Like, that to me is like the holy grail.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
That's interesting question I want to pull up from the chat before we kind of wrap this up. And it's an interesting one because it's coming from your people. It's coming from a Skaven person, and it came from Vermin Lord Warbringer saying, what would be the best beast to beat Skaven? What type of army would be our best to beat Skaven, I assume is what autocorrect. I don't know what's going on there, Vermin Lord Warbringer. Are you looking to switch allegiances? Who's your biggest bugbear? Who do you fear the most as a Skaven player when you're at a tournament?
Yeah, so there's a couple of really bad matchups it depends on the list, because, with the caveat of you can build Skaven towards almost anything, right? So you can build a shooting Skaven list, you can build a purely melee Skaven list, you can build a magic Skaven list. For my Skaven list, which is, the Plague Monk says your melee beat sticks, Acolyte says your shooting. The biggest, I guess, threat I've seen in tournaments is usually like the type of armies that can put out a lot of damage and do multiple rounds of attacks. So, for example, your Lords of the Lodge.
I was literally about to say Fire Slayers, like Fire Slayers with a double piling in.
Yeah. So it's that ability, and the problem, I guess, from my perspective, and not a problem with their army, but the challenge I face as a Skaven player is that something with the damage output of 40 Hearthguard can get through a screen, step forward 3 inches, and hit something valuable. And that applies to, obviously, Lords of the Lodge. It applies to Terrorgeist in Gristlegore. It applies to Archaon in the current Reapers of Vengeance build. Any of those ones where you got either a big monster or a lot of units that are going to put out a lot of damage, get through your screens, and before I get to counter, go through the next lot as well. I've had a game against Corey Ford in Bendigo where he took Archaon, a Lord on Karkadrak, and Varangard, and I literally, at the start of my first turn, had my Screaming Bell, my Furnace, my Arch-Warlock, and 2 units of Acolytes left. And that's that list, the one with the 40 Plague Monks, the 40 Plague Monks, the 40 Clan Rats. He went through like 90% of my army in turn 1.
What about some of the current, top tier meta armies? You've got Lumineth, for example. I know in the UK they're building a lot of, shooting Lumineth, fishing for those mortal wounds. Or you mentioned earlier about the Cathalar, the model that can basically debuff you based on your bravery, or even Be'lakor messing with you a little bit. How do you find those types of armies, or So
Be'lakor can be a pain in terms of doing the killing. I find I've yet to see someone. I've played Be'lakor a couple of times. I'm yet to see someone use Be'lakor to stop me screening. So, for example, they're never going to put it on my 40 Clan Rats, but my 40 Clan Rats is what gives me the opportunity to hold objectives and all that kind of stuff.
And you don't have a lot of flying, so you can't get. If I block up, if you use the Be'lakor ability to on a 5+, you've got to that allows you to move them.
That could
you've got
screw up my entire plan.
Especially if you like you are stuck.
Yeah. Oh, well, I mean, you've still got Gnawholes and stuff, but it just means that you are severely limited. But I've never seen anyone use Be'lakor that way, which would be smart. But at the same time, it's also smart to do things like, I see you've buffed up this unit of Plague Monks, make them roll a 5 before they do anything. But anyway, it's also one of those things where Be'lakor has to do it at the start of the battle, so they don't know what I'm going to do until I do it, and they're much safer putting it onto Plague Monks.
And you've got 2 units of Plague Monks. So if I put Bellacor's ability on Plague Monk Unit A, you've still got Plague Monk Unit B. So it does give you some abilities, but I guess
Lumineth is a different issue. I don't find them as bad. Again, because their shooting output isn't enough to go through my wounds. I mean, sure, they can pick off my Acolytes at the back of the board. That's all right. They're not going to hold me on objectives. And they're going to take turns after turn, clear it. Like, especially if they're going to attack my, Acolytes and Plague Monks, I've got Clan Rats holding objectives the whole time. And if they want to take out the Clan Rats, I'll just put, my killer units on objectives instead and win. So I don't find that an issue.
A retreat and charge would be perfect while they're in formation, while they're kind of marching up the board slowly. You can really manipulate the board and force them to break their cohesion, or you're just going to wrap around them. And if they happen to have a tech list behind them, or get to those swishy heroes or behind the lines, you can out. I think that to me is where Skaven really. This game is dominated by movement. Anytime you can be fast, whether it's things like Sky High with KO, the tunneling, the teleporting, or just super fast armies, and Skaven with the retreat and charge, and generally being fast armies, you've got a lot of those movement tools that makes it very challenging for other armies who are more slow and don't have the teleports and things like that.
And you can really negate the Cathalar just by keeping within your 13-inch bubbles. It's like, she can take, one of their units' battle shock numbers and add it to mine. If I'm not taking battle shock, I don't care. So that kind of stuff can be really good.
And you're not that reliant on magic. Like, it's not like you have 6 spells to cast. You don't have an endless spell that you must get off, like Soul Screen Bridge, right? So with these supercasters, you're not. I mean, if there's a supercaster, it's going to be hard, but getting off more warp power is nice, but not necessarily the crux of your strategy.
No. Well, what you do is you play a different game. If you can't kill stuff with your Scryer Acolytes, you use them to hold objectives and force them to kill them before they can hold that objective back. It's not always about killing everything for us Skaven players. Half the time it's just surviving long enough to hold the points.
Awesome. Got someone painting a screaming bell as we speak. So shout out to people. I think
they're a fantastic model.
They're a lovely model. They're so fun. Someone's actually one of my mates has just given me a whole bunch of the spare parts, and there's just some cool pieces. And I've actually, one of my Mega Gargants is throwing the Gatebreaker has got the actual Plague Furnace.
Oh, the Furnace. Yeah,
He's holding that, like he's swinging that as opposed to
That's awesome.
swinging a big. So they're wonderful models, and I'm actually falling in love with Warp Fire Green. That contrast is just so good. So
yeah,
this has been good, man. I've really enjoyed this. Is there anything that you've
fun.
kind of picked up and learnt along the way that maybe a new Skaven player might need to know about? I think for me, if I kind of give my thing that I keep talking about, and I think it's probably more popular in Skaven than ever before, is retreat. People think they should just fight out combats, and often retreating is the best option, and Skaven rewards you for retreating because you can still charge, you can still bubble wrap, you can still go into a better position, you can still go for objectives. So for me, remember that retreating is an option.
Yeah, totally. It's one of the biggest, I guess, strengths of the battle tome. I guess looking back at my progression through Skaven to where I am now, it would probably be to look for that reliability. Whichever kind of method you go for, look for reliability, because the book's full of fun stuff and a lot of it's not reliable. So you'll find, for example, competitive lists, your hammer, like your unit that does the killing, is either Plague Monks or Storm Vermin,
Yes.
because they are the reliable damage output.
The halberds, right? They're the halberd guys.
Yeah. So and it was a learning point. It was like, you see all this cool stuff in the book. It's like, well, why don't I use the Claw Lords to buff my clan rats, and they can be strong? And it's like, you test it out and you realize that the amount you're putting into them isn't worth it. So go through it, play games. You'll find there is only a few builds for certain roles, but those builds are good and there's variety within them. So yeah, build the slight version that you want. Don't limit yourself to one of the sub factions. Take the whole thing.
I know Dan Brewer has always he's always screaming at me about not using movement trays, and I think he has been a big advocate of, especially with Skaven. You're running a block of 40 clan rats. Yes, it's easier to put them on movement trays, but with the retreating and charging and just the way you can kind of manipulate the board by playing without movement trays, you can really create some interesting shapes. You can tag opponents. You can deny parts of the board a whole lot easier, and the way that you look at your army is different than just moving up these regiments of models back to back. And again, your clan rats are not there to do damage. You're not trying to maximize how many models are in combat, because they're not going to do a lot. It's more about board control, board manipulation, being within range of buffs, denying people from getting to your home objectives or your juicy stuff like your Plague Monks and your Acolytes.
Yeah, I've watched a couple of interviews and talks by Dan, and that was the one thing that I guess I took from it very early on, and it has been a really good lesson, is just forget movement trays for Skaven. And that applies to everything. You get charged with your clan rats, you don't have to pile in, just stand there and hit with the 3 that are in combat. Because in the end, they're there for the bubble and to stop other things from hitting them. So the moment you kind of close in, you suddenly got 2 holes on either side for other things to get in.
Yeah, absolutely. The longer you can keep your opponent away from your juicy stuff, your Grey Seer, your Acolytes, your Jezzails, your various buff pieces like your Arch-Warlock or your Bombardier or whatever you take, right? I love it. Yeah, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And I think it's a really good call.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, it's a matter of you'll be standing there looking at the board going, right, what's the best outcome for me now? Because last turn is different.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like Skaven is really like chess. It's like a thinking person's game, and adapting to your strategy. And as I said, always think about, should I retreat from this combat? But again, Ro's list, by the way, guys, is not the holy grail of lists. There is no one list that rules them all. If you love your Jezzails, bring Jezzails into the list. You love your Bombardier, bring your Bombardier. You want to bring Thanquil in. You want to bring in 3 Vermin Lords. You want to get a Claw Lord in. You want to run a whole bunch of giant rats. Whatever that list might be, your Doom Wheels, do you. This is a list that you've kind of worked. I think the key is, how you've taken the rules and built a competitive list, and I think showing off not to spread your force out over the different clans, but rather really hone in and find the key synergies. And it's okay to be more than just, you don't have to go all in on Eshin. all in on Scryer. But really do think about not stretching yourself too much and thinking about who gets the buffs and how they apply on the table.
Absolutely, it's a bit of a finesse army, and you need to you need to have balance, and that balance has to then be matched in your play style. So it's something that you probably have to build individually, like you said. Like, you're not going to be able to just pick up a list and go, I can play this.
Yeah, that and Nighthaunt feel like they're very finesse armies. It's just that Nighthaunt is more forgiving with the ignoring rend and the 6-up deathless save. So very finesse armies. But Ro, this has been awesome, man. I've learned so much having a chat, kind of looking at lists, seeing how you're building your lists. Again, season for taste, bring in your types of models that you love. But Ro, is there anyone that you want to shout out? Clearly, your crew's been in the chat for a while now.
Yeah, I better say hi to the entire Measured team, but particularly the dudes in Kyneton who we play a lot of games locally with. They're all good guys, except I'm obviously going to read this chat a bit later and want to take all of that back. The whole, to me, the whole AOS community as a whole, like, I've been to, I don't go to a lot of tournaments, but the ones I do go to, I'm always meeting really good people, like really friendly, sociable. Like, I know from outside of our community, there's occasionally the stigma of, oh, you're a bunch of like closet nerds, you don't talk to people, and blah blah blah. There's a lot of really kind of interesting, social, brilliant human beings in this community, and the more people like that I meet, like, the more I love this game.
And I've got to say, Ro, I'm coming to your neck of the woods in less than 3 weeks from now, and I think some people have my name as a target, so you have to protect me from Pat. You have to protect me from who else? Corey. You have to protect me from Joel. You have to track from Pat. There's a whole bunch.
Everyone in Measured, yeah.
Measured crew, I think I'm gonna have to watch it. You're gonna really protect me. But if I don't come back in 4 weeks' time, the content stops. You know that Measured has captured me. But Measured do have a really cool battle report channel. It is. I would not play it at work, guys. Go check it out if it's not suitable for work. The language is a bit rough. But
they're usually about 12 beers in too.
Yeah, they're a bit ginger. But Ro, this has been an absolute pleasure. The lists, by the way, guys, are down below. So in the episode description, we can continue the conversation on Discord. The lists, both of the lists are there. So if you want to check them out and kind of see what they were, please do check them out. But Ro, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. And I will see you in a few weeks.
Yeah, cool. See you then.
All right, see you guys. I hope you found that discussion valuable. If you did, give the video the old thumbs up. And if you have a comment or an insight, leave it in the comment section below. The champions over here are my AOS Coach Patreons and YouTube members. So you guys are bloody legends. Thank you for all the support. If you want to know more about the support programs, the links are below down here in the episode description, along with a link to the Discord server, so we can continue this conversation. Until next time, don't forget to name your characters and have a good one.